Hi everyone, welcome to our first finance event of the year, the Route to Private Equity CFO. My name's Ben Smith. I work on the portfolio finance team here at Altus Partners, placing CFOs and their respective teams into private equity backed businesses. During this event, I was joined by Maria Carradise, Portfolio Director at Mayfair Equity Partners, Brian Southwood, Group CFO of Roboya Group, formerly Symphony Ventures, and Phil Symes, who's CFO at Reddington, formerly of Cambridge Education Group and Visa. So we're going to be joining the discussion with Maria, talking about CFOs and the attributes that she specifically looks for in a PE environment.
In terms of attributes, there's nothing specific. Occasionally you may want a specific skill because we've identified that business need, but generally it's being able to deliver fantastic accounting information with pace and urgency, being really into the detail of the numbers and the accounting, and also probably being a bit of a jack of all trades, depending on the business. So you may have to also head up the IT function and understand how that works and all the cyber security, GDPR, data protection side of things. You may also have to head up the HR function or operations or something else within the business. And depending on that business, you will probably be wearing more than one hat. And so really what we're looking for is people who have either got that experience already, or they have that sort of ability to, and that hunger to want to learn and to want to expand their understanding. But that from an investor's perspective is probably where I would start.
Yeah, excellent. And just actually to follow up on that, I mean, how quickly do you tend to recognize that someone has those traits? Is it through a long interview process, or is it something that you get through actually working with that business, with that person rather, in the first few weeks?
We have a couple of things that we factor in. So we always do management due diligence. So if that person is already with the company, when we take them on, we do quite detailed management due diligence to understand where they sit, where their gaps may be in understanding or ability, so that we can help improve those. Where they're brought in after the event, again, we will assess them over a period of time, and we have internal assessment ability where we, anybody that sort of has a significant amount of work with that particular person will go in and score them and, make suggestions on where there might be some improvements so that we can monitor that over a period of time. So there's quite a lot of work we do. We talk to the chairman and the non-execs. We talk to the CEO to really gather a full picture of that person and whether or not they have the skills to remain with the business throughout our life cycle. And I think typically we find that where somebody doesn't, it's not because they're no good. It's just that what we're trying to achieve for that business over the next 2 or 3 years may be better achieved with somebody who has more experience, rather than we're saying, oh, well, you're actually not any good at your job. They're probably very good at their job, but we need them to be something more than that. And there is an assessment that has to be made whether we think they can get there in time, or whether we think we need somebody with more experience and we bring them on board.
Yeah. Okay. And on the flip side of that, Phil, I get a lot of people speaking to me about becoming a PE CFO, and there's naturally a lot of perception that comes with that around certain things. But what's the actual reality in the day-to-day?
Sure. I mean, I think I'm just going to echo a lot of the things that Maria said, but obviously from this side of the table rather than the investor. So, I mean, being a private equity CFO, it's almost the perfect job for a pandemic because you can't go out anyway, so you can just work. So it's brilliant. Yeah, probably not so great for Brian if you've got small children in the house running around. That must be a nightmare. But it's worth just going back to what Maria said about the life cycle. If you work in a corporate, typically you have a sort of career path and it's, multi-year. Whereas it's with a PE job, a PE CFO, it's really very much a project. So it's a multi-year project. If it, smaller companies, maybe 3 to 5 years, bigger companies, maybe even 7. And actually, you don't know, who knows what's going to happen. Could be anything from 1 to 10, but it's a multi-year project. And there's a cyclical element to that. So that in the beginning, you got to, do a lot of things that Maria was talking about. You've got to drive performance. You've got to make investment to try and maximize the value. The PE house has spent an awful lot of money buying the company, and they want to get it to a good exit. So in the early days, you invest to drive revenue. You look at your cost base. You look at building a platform if necessary. You look at your systems. Those kind of investments you can't make at the end, because at the end you need to be maximizing your return, and you won't get the return by the time you want to exit. So there's very much a phasing as you go through the cycle. And as you move on, you start thinking about, how you're going to exit. What's the story going to be on exit? Can you have a bit of glitz or sparkly dust on exit? What's going to be the stuff left on the table for the next purchaser? And there's a whole world that goes on in terms of building your story. And as the CFO, as you're sitting there plotting this, you don't know if it's going to be trade or an IPO or another PE house, and therefore you don't know if you're going to survive. And actually, if your results aren't any good, you may not survive even to the exit. So you've got to be very comfortable with that as a sort of lifestyle. Typically, like Maria, the PE houses are very charming. They are very bright. They're very focused. Often they'll only do 1 or 2 deals a year. The team you're working with from the PE house may have only done 1 deal. And so it's actually very, very personal. And although they want it to be successful, they want it to make money, it's also a key part of their career path and growing their own careers. So they are very focused on the deal achieving, and there's pressure. I mean, in my experience, all the people I've met have been pretty much charming and bright and intelligent, and none of the bad things you hear about private equity. But actually, they want the job to work. They want the deal to work. As a CFO, you have to do the normal things. You have to hit your numbers. Key, if you want a good relationship with the PE house, hit your numbers, and don't try and cheat. But also be transparent. Bad news early. So if you add all that together, it's a pressurized job. It's got long hours. There's no certainty you'll make any money out of it, and it's got limited job security. So if you're comfortable with that, there are some upsides. It is a very rewarding job in terms of the breadth of all the stuff you do. If you want to be the CFO of a commercial business, this is a really good way to do it. You're responsible, as Maria was saying, you're responsible for all the normal gamut of stuff as a CFO, which goes into the contract negotiation, the commercial aspects of the business, pricing, M&A. Maybe you're also, depending on the size of it, you're responsible for other parts as well. You also have the sense that if it's successful, that you've actually built something. You've built a business, you've grown a business, and actually you've made a business successful over the time. So there is a sense of achievement from just working in a very fast-paced environment and seeing something develop. So there you go. That's my take.
Yeah, it's really interesting actually, just to hear the almost the empathies between the CFO and the investor, and actually what the realities are for both sides and how they overlap. Brian, I know I put this question actually to you in our discussion earlier, and I know you had some slides.
Yes.
So Brian's taking it to the next level. So if you just wanted to share and go through those as well, that would be great.
I mean, basically, I'm going to echo what Maria and Phil have said, but I thought I'd do it some of it through the medium of slides, just to make it a bit different, and also just some nice sound bites in here that might be good takeaways for people. So let's just get in there. So I mean, the question at hand, as we've discussed there, is the realities of being a CFO in a PE environment. As CFOs, our DNA is very similar, all CFOs, but I think there's a few simple slides here that covers some of the similarities and differences. As to some extent, as I'll go into, it's the kind of different world. And this topic is very close to me and for us at Roboyo, because half the work we do is to help people transform their businesses through automation. And a lot of the customers tend to be CFOs. So again, it's something that we actually talk about quite a lot, hence why I've got some slides already available. And so I suppose if you just go to the where we are in terms of today's kind of global operating reality, we do operate in a time of exponential change. Let me explain what I mean by that. If I asked you where you were, where you would be after taking 30 linear steps, it'd be pretty easy to predict. You'd be roughly 30 meters away. But if I asked you where you'd be if you took 30 exponential steps, then that gets a little harder to compute. So if every step doubles 1 meter, 2, 4, 8, 16, and so on, in 30 exponential steps, you'll be 1 billion meters away, the equivalent of circumnavigating the Earth 26 times. So I think we all live, work, and especially in PE environments, we all lead businesses in exponential times. And I think expectation, competition, and disruption have jumped to warp speed. And what does this mean? I mean, the velocity of change is now an extinction level event for businesses that stand still. The world does not wait. And I think, today, the fast eat the slow, the analog eat the digital. Sorry, the digital eat the analog. And less than 6 years from now, 75% of S&P 500 companies would probably have disappeared. And so, I think that's why we at Roboyo say the fortune favors not the brave, but the automated. But that's a slightly different point. So next slide, it definitely is a different role. So given the pace of change, the role of a CFO has really had to change. And so again, what we say at Roboyo is, to be successful, our role has moved from the back office function to having a transformative enterprise-wide impact by enabling growth, efficiency, and strategy. So it really is finance from the back office to the front line. And the evolution of a CFO's role is being driven by certain factors that we've kind of covered already, but really is, the increased expectations from the enterprise, accelerating change, the constant pursuit of growth and profits, the volume and velocity of data and the need to extract value from it, a greater compliance requirements driven by regulation and consumer expectations. So today's CFO needs to be a superhero, a trusted advisor, an innovator, a digital guardian, an internal disruptor. And the CFO must be well equipped to help today's enterprise translate unprecedented change into unparalleled opportunity. And this requires a broader skill set beyond finance, and definitely with the credentials of an inspirational leader. So it definitely is a different environment. It's got slightly different challenges as well in terms of the PE environment. The challenges faced are familiar, but they are definitely different. I think in PE, they are heightened, they are amplified, they're quickened and exaggerated, and the consequences that are often brought to bear are, how shall I put it, can be brought more forcefully. Some points that Phil mentioned in terms of the time frame, moving the dial is done within a shorter horizon. There's investment, but it's within this shortened time frame, and consequently, it is limited. Rarely are things as you'd want them. Steady state really doesn't exist. Operational systems go from imperfect to entirely absent. There's no time to wait until everything is right. So it's a case of building as you go, an incremental model of perfection, or more often, a version of workable. And decision-making, this is a key point, is often done using what we say the Colin Powell 40-70 model. Tough decisions should only be made when you know 40% of the information. Beyond 70%, the chances are the competition has beaten you to it already. So data is important, but experience and judgment are critical. And then there's the crux of it all. It's all about results, near term, right now, today. And so don't let me put you off, but the speed, discipline, focus, the need to cover ground, often new ground, fast and successfully. These factors make the reality gripping and the sense of achievement exhilarating. I think, so to summarize, a CFO and a PE CFO are both superheroes. They're both just different types of superhero. And ultimately, what we say is that in the new abnormal, success demands disrupting your business before somebody else does. In terms of the kind of reality of being a PE CFO, similar comments have made. Your business is likely to be run by founders and bootstrapped. It will have had likely minimal investment in back office functions or systems or team members. Both Phil and Marie have said similar things. There might be little in place in terms of reporting, KPIs, controls when you first start off a role. It might need a radical overhaul and a build, but you're also doing that whilst accelerating growth. And that might also involve organic and inorganic through acquisitions. The pressure's high, the hours are long, and we will say you're in constant triage. You've also got to cope with the relationship dynamics changing as well. And I think, as Phil said, you've got to build the personal relationships with the investors. Why it could be disproportionately important to them in their portfolio. And finally, how do you cope? So I think ruthless prioritization is definitely the key. You will never be able to do anywhere near what is on your to-do list. You need to rapidly build and develop a team. So you need to be very good at team building and learn who to employ and when. You've got to stretch the team, empower them. You've got to give them air cover because they're going to be exposed to stakeholders. And that really strong working culture can help you build a successful business moving forwards. Talked about this earlier there with Phil and Maria. Total transparency to the board. You've got to be willing to take decisive actions, stand in front of them, be very consistent in your decision making. And going back to my early career, where I saw a lot of senior executives in big corporates having kind of paralysis by analysis, the world's changed. It moves too quickly. You have to be decisive and take calculated risks. That's a key differentiator in the business. But also, it's a way you engage with the organization. Finance is not back office. You shouldn't be sitting there hiding in the corner. You have to be a key enabler for an organization. You want to create an environment where teams want to engage with you. They want your advice. They want your counsel. And again, going back 20 years, a great CFO was someone who always said no to everything. I think that's the complete opposite these days. You need to be able to say yes to the right things quickly in a fast-moving environment. Ultimately, though, you need to be able to want to enjoy the ride, and that's critical to success.
Excellent. Brilliant. Thanks for those slides. I think, just seeing some of those points, bullet points actually is really helpful. And it's interesting again that you've mentioned, I think Maria mentioned earlier, that you have to almost be, all things to everyone and wear many different hats as CFO. And I think the visibility as well is a common theme that we see. I think it's important at this point just to note, obviously, that there's not only PE CFOs, there's a whole wide suite of CFOs doing their jobs for different businesses. And I guess, Brian and Phil particularly, you've worked in different backgrounds and under different ownership. So it would be good just to hear from you, Phil, some of the nuances between working at a PE-backed business and a listed business as a CFO, and if there are any key differences.
I mean, in running a sort of commercial business, reporting, team building, systems, driving profit, it's all similar. But on a listed business, you have the overhead of the reporting. I mean, particularly if you're reporting on in the US quarterly, just doing the quarterly reporting cycle, which I think these days has criminal liability. So you do take it quite seriously. And back in the day, I spent 2 days drafting a paragraph of disclosure on a particularly dodgy legal case. So all that doesn't exist in private equity. I mean, in the smaller companies, you're going to be an FRS 102 reporter, which means you're actually probably doing limited disclosure. As we've just talked about, you're thinking about a story over multiple years. So part of the art of your reporting in the early days is not to actually dig in what your story is in years 1 or 2, because by the time you get to year 5, it might be quite different. So the whole different telling the story, reporting, the cycle, and the financial accounting is just completely different. It doesn't mean it's better or worse, but it's fish and fowl.
Yeah. And Brian, did you have anything to add onto that?
Yeah, I mean, there's just two categories of me, just building what Phil said. There's kind of governance and stakeholder management, which is one section, and the other one is kind of, I suppose, generally, although it's just a general piece about rate of growth and operational flexibility. So to Phil's point, it's so important when you are listed, you are managing your share price, you are managing your current shareholders and stakeholders, and trying to create demand for your shares from the marketplace, whether that be institutions or retail investors. That almost becomes the lion's share of your role. You're probably spending 50% of your time on the road, quarterly shareholder roadshows, especially if you're doing a placing by raising further funds on the stock market. If you're doing a buying bills, for example, it could be 60 to 7% of your time is spent literally, quite externally, working with in the UK, your nomad, which is your kind of internal policeman, and just literally managing that with the CEO on the road all the time. Less connected to the business on a day-to-day basis. So that's one major difference in terms of kind of, again, as Phil said, your numbers have to be spot on, your KPIs and drivers have to be spot on. You tend to have more resources to do that because no one will push you onto the stock market if they don't think you're ready. But ultimately, you've got less flexibility in terms of getting your numbers wrong, because if you are down by circa 10%, it's profit warning time, which will therefore be disaster in terms of share price. So again, there's lots of other sensitivities that obviously in private equity environment, you've got to nail your numbers because people want results. But if you want to slightly change tack or strategy or pivot to do something else at some point with investor consent, then you've got a little bit more operational flexibility that comes along, whereby I think it's more steady as she goes, I suppose, in the listed environment, because you need that predictable runway to manage shareholder expectations and share price. So I think it's nuanced, but quite different.
Yeah, and Maria, obviously you've got a wealth of experience in placing CFOs into senior leadership positions within your companies. But have you found that there's a common difference in the skill set between a CFO who has prior private equity experience and someone who's come from a listed environment, and is there a transitioning period?
Yes, I mean the key difference is a listed company CFO normally struggles with the pace and urgency with which we operate, and also they tend to be surprised by the lack of resource within the finance department. So you would have someone to help you with your tax, you would have someone to help with the basic accounting. You typically don't have that in a small and medium-sized PE-backed business, and so you have to do a lot of that stuff yourself. But saying that, I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly. Some transition beautifully, and it's as if they were made for that role, and others will struggle because it's just not their skill set. And we like to think that 99% of the time we get it right, but occasionally we don't. And so we then have to look at either bringing some other members of the team together to help support that person, or we would look to replace that person with somebody who can cope with that transition.
Yeah, and I think just for some of the audience members here who are perhaps looking to take that step up, or even looking to the future 5 or 10 years down the line, but are looking to charter a course into getting into that position. Brian, is there anything by way of roadmap or key points in your career path that you think would have set you on the journey to be a PE CFO?
Yeah, I mean, it's a slightly difficult one because I think everyone's got different characteristics and skills. Everyone's route will be different. But to me, it's two things kind of stick out. As a CFO, you've got to be a technical specialist in finance. You've got to know your onions. You've got to know what you're doing. That's everything from financial accounting, management accounting, because again, as Maria said, you have to do most things. It also helps to have a lot of commercial acumen because, again, Phil said this, you're involved in pricing discussions, you're involved in a lot of commercial discussions, and also you're probably wearing several hats where you've got a bit of HR, legal and IT as well, which is very common. So you've got to have some experience in those matters and knowing what you're doing across all the financial kind of competencies. But to me, as important or more important is you need to be a leadership figure. So again, you're someone who's got the capability, strength of character, resilience, gravitas, who can inspire the teams and the wider organization because you are habitually under-resourced. and you've got to basically put it out of the bag all the time. And you can only do that if you can help, get the trust of the organization and help people come with you and drive those results. So I think it's equally important to have the latter as well as the technical skills. In terms of what helped me along the way, it's just a common sense piece. But for me, it was just, I've always had a kind of slightly non-linear career purposefully to push myself into areas where I thought, well, I've never done an IPO before. I'd like to do one. So let's find a way of getting involved in one. And I think that's sometimes you've just got to try and have that kind of inquisitive nature to actually want to discover and learn. So whether it's different environments, different geographies, learning from different leadership teams is very important. I think you soak them up like a sponge, try and get involved in different businesses with different business models, technologies, etc. That will help you to, I suppose, sharpen your instinct for when you get a PE CFO role. You've got that tool set and you've got that instinct to know what's right and wrong and what to do and how to prioritize. So I think that's one thing. One final thing, earlier in my career when I worked with the big corporates, I was always kind of obsessed with trying to get as much value as I could out of that particular placement or whatever. So little examples are, don't stay if you're in the finance team all the time. Find ways of getting out in the field with people. So if simple examples are, if you work for a large organization that has shift work, sign up, just say you want to go on shifts, even though you don't have to, just so you can experience what's it like to work on shifts. You tend to find lots about the organization when you do that, because people think, oh, that's interesting. What's the finance guy doing here on shifts? Opens doors for conversations. Other things about going out with a sales team. Ultimately, learn from the sales team. How do they talk to customers? What's the value story? How can you help them? How can you translate that from a financial perspective into something more interesting, or not, or just learn from them? All those things are critical when you're, on the up in your career, just to get all those learning points. And you probably find that you can add huge value to every conversation that you have actually in the organization, whether it's someone junior in operations or it's a senior salesperson, just because you've got a different mindset and perspective, and you'll learn from that. So I just encourage people, just go for it. Don't just look within finance. Try and find as many experiences as you can within your role. And basically put yourself about.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. Is it, Maria, is that something that you find in the best CFOs that you've dealt with, is that they've had almost a wealth of experience in different parts of the business, or is it the case that you look for specific excellence in one area, i.e. someone who's got a long track record of exits, or someone who's particularly good on the financial accounting side?
I think it depends on the situation. So if we are looking for a CFO because we're looking to IPO a business, for example, then it's normally helpful, although not an absolute requirement, to have someone that's got that experience, because they know what to do. They're comfortable in that situation. But saying that, I think for me the key is that that CFO has to be a right-hand man for the CEO, which means he has to understand the commercials of the business and how that business really operates and makes money. And I think that's the most important thing. So being able to have had a wealth of experience across the entire business, understand operationally how that business works, and be able to be a commercial sound board for the CEO is really key.
Okay. And Phil, was there anything that you wanted to add on that piece?
I think if you are thinking about how you're going to get there, one of the only thing that hasn't really been touched on is it's worth trying to figure out how you're going to get referenced. So as I'm sure Maria said, they spend a lot of time looking at the CFO as a key role. They're going to check you out. They're going to check you out quite carefully. It's worth thinking about who you're going to give as references, and who you're going to give as references who's credible to a PE house. And actually, you always know more people than you think. So it just needs a bit of thought rather than it's a stumbling block.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's actually, it's something that I don't think a lot of people will probably have thought about. I think a lot of people are naturally drawn to the skill set side of things, but definitely the referencing piece is really important on that front. We've got a couple of questions actually from some of our audience that were sent in earlier. I know Rebecca has just posted on the chat asking the panel to discuss the exit process and specifically IPO. I think, to be honest, we could have a whole hour on that just on itself, and each process is indeed very different. So I think what we'll do is any questions like that we'll look to get answered after the webinar. But thank you very much, obviously, for sending that through, and we will come back to you on those sorts of questions. But I think that the first one we've got, and it's one we get quite often, and actually, Maria, it's probably one that you can answer best as someone who hires CFOs, is what would you give, advice would you give rather to a person who has extensive CFO experience and board level experience, but not necessarily private equity experience, and obviously looking to get into PE?
Yeah. Again, if you've got extensive experience, then that's something that you should be talking about. We don't typically have only CFOs that have private equity experience. We understand that people have to start somewhere, but having broader experience is sometimes more preferable to having somebody who's already worked in a PE environment. And I think as long as you can show that you have the capability and the skill sets that we're looking for that particular role, it may not be every role, but for that particular role, then it doesn't really matter whether you have PE experience or not, because there'll be other things we are looking for. And, again, we've got the skill set piece, which is important, but we're also looking for how you will interact with the other members of senior management. How will you provide that sort of support function to the CEO? Do you, would you get on within the culture of that business? There's lots of other things to look for. And I certainly would, if you were going for an interview, for example, make it very clear all the skills that you do have. And, the PE house will then decide whether or not they think you're the right fit for that particular business.
Yeah. And just to draw on that a little bit more, Phil, obviously you've worked in a few different industries. Did you find it particularly tough to transition from one industry into another in a PE-backed environment?
I've always just looked for something that was an interesting role, an interesting circumstance where the company was going to grow, or there was something going on that just made the environment interesting. And I've never been I've never tried to stick in a particular sector. Whether that's right or wrong, I don't know, but that's what I've always looked for the situation. I think there's a lot of pressure that, when people are being recruited, it's always, here's the long list of all the asks, but quite often they don't end up going there. I think it is quite difficult for the recruitment consultant, because if you've got someone who's quite good in one space, trying to get them to be taken seriously in a different sector can sometimes cause problems, because that's not what they're looking for. But I think there's an awful lot of opportunities out there. And also sometimes you'll find with PE businesses, they'll buy a business in an industry which, for whatever reason, doesn't have a great native bench strength. And so they're inevitably going to be looking outside to bring in talent or to increase the bench strength. So there's always opportunities out there, but I always just look for the situation.
Okay. And then Maria, just on the background of the people that you typically deal with, do you find that it's more helpful to come from a rounded core finance function, say as a group FC looking to step up, or do you tend to get a lot of candidates that come from an M&A and corporate finance background because of the nature of the deal side and the relation to that?
Yeah, we get a mixed bag, actually. And I think, I wouldn't say we get more of one than another. We tend to get, rather than financial controllers looking to a step up, what we typically get are people that have already had an FD role somewhere and are looking to just expand to the next level, to the CFO kind of role. So rather than just being responsible for for the finances on a daily basis. They're looking to broaden that experience and be responsible as a head of department for finance in general. I think it's quite rare that we would take on somebody who's come from financial controller role directly into an FD or CFO role, unless again they have a lot of other experience. And so, I'd never say never. If they have a lot of experience in other areas or in other types of business, and we think that would be really helpful for this particular business, then of course we would take the interview and see where that led. But typically it's FDs looking to step up.
Yeah. And Brian, how did you find the transition into your first number one position at a PE backed environment?
Yeah, I mean, I'd done other things before, which kind of prepared me for that. So having my own startup was brutal, and that was, we got PE backing eventually for that. So I kind of had to learn the hard way. So yeah, I think my routine was quite different. I suppose again, there's a few points here. I believe to be successful, you need to have a rounded experience set. So whether you've come from if you've got an M&A background because you've been working for a kind of corporate finance house, that's fantastic. You know how to build business models, you know how to do sales decks and the narrative around that. But unless you've experienced it at the other side of the desk, where you're not just selling, once you've sold, you have to deliver. That's a completely different skill set. And I would encourage people, if they want to become a CFO, you need to have both of those. It's the same as if you come out of audit. A lot of people think, oh, great, I've got someone who's audit qualified. Well, that's fine. But audit is great from a details perspective. But again, you haven't got that fast pace you're working to in terms of, the commercial side of it. And the accountability for delivering results is something that you're not maybe used to. So you need to get used to it. So I just think that it's worthwhile trying to get different experiences. All those are valid, but if you've just got one or two of them, you might, things might not work out for you in this way. You need to have all the bases covered. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we're coming actually to the end of our time. It's amazing how quickly time flies on these sorts of things. So we've got about 10 minutes left on this. But I just wanted to ask the three of you what your key takeaways, given the nature of our discussion, would be to the majority of the audience who are probably on that trajectory and looking to step up. So Phil, if we start with you.
Sure. I mean, if I was listening to this and starting my career, what I'd say is you've got to be sort of true to yourself. You've got to live in your own skin. I knew a guy in about 2 or 3 years ago, and he worked as a big corporate. He worked for a big pharma, and he knew someone who'd made a lot of money working in a private equity firm. So he thought he'd have a bit of that. He got himself a job in a portfolio company, and after a month, he toddled back to his company and asked for his old job back. And they took him back because he was talented, and actually they took him back and promoted him. So the strange way to get a promotion. So, and he's a really talented guy, but it just didn't suit him. But he got slightly seduced by the possibility of making money. So I would, having listened to this, I'd try and, if I were out there, I'd reflect on, is this an environment that's really going to suit me? And also it's family, working hours, the whole gamut of how it's going to fit together, and then decide whether you actually want to do it or not, but rather than just focus on making money.
Yeah, I think there's something definitely to be said as to the real motivations of wanting to become a PE CFO. I think, it sounds like a very attractive prospect, but until you dig a bit deeper and realize what it's actually like, it might not actually be for everyone. So I think that's important. Brian, what was your takeaway?
Yeah, I mean, to take away just some of the early comments. I mean, being a PE CFO is not for everyone. Working in that environment's not for everyone. And to me, getting the experience and diversity of the skills on that journey and tooling yourself up for a role like that is so critical early on in your career. and getting that diversity of experience and working with different people, different industries, just it sharpens your instinct for when you get into that environment, which is pretty unforgiving, but can be very, very rewarding. And I think going back to my earlier points, the pace of change is only going to get faster. People in PE environments are already having to do that. So I think even if you're in a listed environment, things are going to get faster for you as well. But certainly, if you are minded to try and go for a PE route, it can be incredibly exciting and very, very rewarding, but also very challenging. So you just need to be prepared for that.
Yeah. And Maria, for people who are determined and really looking to go down that path and perhaps cross paths with yourself one day or one of your peers, what would you say is your takeaway for them?
Yeah, so I would echo what Brian and Phil have already said, but I think in addition, I would say whatever business you're in today, go and get some more experience. Find out how other parts of the business operate. Understand how what are the key drivers to make profitability within that business. Get experience doing other things like within the IT department. Understand what systems they're using, what systems you're using, how you would go about building a new system if you had to within the finance function. Get as much experience as you can, because that makes you a much better rounded person and will give you a much, I would say, greater opportunity to work in PE, where you have to be, as I said earlier, jack of all trades. And I think I would just leave people with one thought, which is in most businesses that are PE operated, when things are going very, very well, it's the CEO that gets the recognition. When things go badly, everybody looks, rightly or wrongly, at the CFO. And you have to be prepared for that. It's not personal. It's just the way of the world. So that's the thought I would leave people with.
Excellent. Well, look, I think obviously I'd like to thank you three for taking the time out to do this. I think there's been some really valuable insights for me as well, and I'm sure there's a lot of good takeaways for our audience members there. So I won't keep you long. I'll let you go and enjoy the sun or go to a beer garden or whatever you got planned tonight. But just for our audience, obviously, if you feel that Altus Partners can help you facilitate that move or help you in that trajectory, or even if you just like to ask any questions following this webinar, please do get in touch. My details will be sent out to everyone, so feel free to drop me a note. And aside from that, this is recorded. I think actually the start may have been cut off a little bit due to the classic COVID technical error, but the majority of this will be recorded. So feel free to get in touch. But thanks everyone for turning up, and thanks Maria, Phil, and Brian for your fantastic input.